All righty. I will call tonight's meeting of the Hingham Advisory Committee Education Subcommittee to order. I will just note that this meeting is being held remotely as an alternative means of public access pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, temporarily amending certain provisions of the open meeting law. You are hereby advised that this meeting and all communications during this meeting may be recorded by the Town of Hingham in accordance with the open meeting law. If any participant wishes to record this meeting, please notify the chair at the start of the meeting in accordance with M.G.L. Chapter 30A, Section 20F, so the chair may inform all other participants of said recording. As I mentioned, I'm recording it. Is anybody else planning to record it? If you could just raise your hand. Okay. Does anybody else need to call to order? Michelle?
I do. Thank you very much, Dave. I'm Michelle Eyre from the Hingham School Committee, and as our chairman, Carrie Nee can't be here today, so I'm going to call us to order following the same remote protocols that Dave Anderson just provided. And I'm joined here tonight by my fellow committee members who make up a quorum, Jen Benham, Tim Miller-Dempsey, Liza O'Reilly, and Ness Carenti.
Great, thanks. And I'll just note that Nancy McDonald, Alan McDonald, George Danis are here with me, who sit on ACES, and Evan Sheehan should be joining us later. Shortly, he says 3 minutes. Well, he said 3. It could be 3 hours, so we never know. What I was going to do, if it's okay with you all, is just depending. I know there's people on the call here tonight who haven't been deeply involved in what, for all of us, must seem like nonstop budget conversations these days. So, in the interest of just kind of framing the state of play of the budget, of the work of the Sustainable Budget Task Force, of what the select board did last night and so forth, and the latest forecast, I thought I would just go through a couple quick slides here, if that's okay with you all. So what I'm going to do is put that up, and I'll just run through that to try to give everybody a common sense of where we're going. All right, do you guys all see that now, the Hingham Advisory slide? Okay, great. All right, so as I said, tonight I just want to briefly provide some context for folks on this call who may not have been involved in our discussions to date around the budget. After that overview, ACES, which is the acronym for the Hingham Advisory Committee Education Subcommittee, will take up its discussion of the budget request for fiscal year 2023 and potentially vote on an amount to recommend to the full advisory committee for its consideration as part of the overall town budget. We can also take questions from the question and comments from the public, if you have any, a little bit down the road. So this is a screenshot of information from the latest town forecast. The top line shows that the latest town forecast lays out a total appropriation number for fiscal year 2023 of $138 million. This budget is balanced and there is no deficit, but the balance is achieved through the use of $3.7 million in one-time funds, including $1.48 million of fund balance, as indicated in the bottom section in green, which can be thought of as the town's savings account. We'll discuss fund balance in a second. This forecast includes no new additional requests, as shown in the $138 million. It represents what we refer to as a, quote, level services budget. And an additional request is another term that we use, which represents services beyond the current existing level services. Any additions to the budget above this current level services budget would require additional money from fund balance to fund them. So just taking a step back, again, this is the same forecast document dated on the 7th of March. Here is the balanced FY23 budget in yellow in context, and it's in the context of the town's latest 5-year forecast. As I just mentioned, FY23 is balanced with the use of $3.7 million in one-time funds. But if you look into the out years, without the one-time funds, the uses exceed the sources from immediately from fiscal year 24 on. This is clearly not sustainable. There are three choices, as Tom Mayo pointed out a couple of meetings ago with the select board, as to how to address these deficits, and the choices are not mutually exclusive. You could cut or reduce services, you could increase revenue with an operating override, and you could use more one-time funds if they were available. So let's talk about one-time funds first. This is a screenshot of the fund balance. It's a number that's produced painstakingly once a year as of the end of the fiscal year. This is the most recent fund balance number as of June 30th, 2021. And what I wanted to point out here is that by 2024, Hingham's COVID-related federal aid dollars will be exhausted. Therefore, fund balance will be the only source of one-time funds. And as you can see here, there are proposed uses for nearly all excess fund balance, leaving an excess unassigned fund balance of $508,000 at the bottom line there. And that's before any new requests are added to the budget. While we would still be in compliance with the town's financial policy, use of fund balance will no longer be a realistic option, and it's certainly no match for the previous page that showed a forecast deficit in FY24 of nearly $6 million. As it relates to this proposed future offset for Foster and the public safety facility, that's the acronym PSF there. I'll talk on that in just a couple seconds. So when town meeting added 36 positions to both municipal and education workforces last year in response to COVID, and I will point out that it did so unanimously, we recognized the budget challenge that was going to create, and we created, or the town administration created, a sustainable budget task force. They did excellent work, and anyone who is taking their Wednesday night to be on this call who hasn't should certainly go and read the Sustainable Budget Task Force report, which you can find on the town's website. You'll note on the left there, the members, that the school perspective was well represented by the superintendent and John Ferris and Ness Carenti. And as I said, it is an excellent document that provides useful information for us for years to come. I'm going to hit a couple highlights from the task force report tonight just to set the stage for the budget discussions we're having. Recall what I said earlier about the three options to address a deficit. There's a reduced services option, there's raising taxes with an override, and then there's the use of one-time money. So, scenario A from the task force report, which is the first of three scenarios that they considered, looks at the first path, which is a reduction in services. It assumes unidentified expense cuts of $2.9 million in FY 2023, and thereby matches expenses with revenue. Note that even after we make those adjustments, which would be service cuts in FY23 to make the deficit zero, we are not out of the woods given the differential between expense growth rates, which are projected to grow at 3.5% annually, which is a little bit lower than they've all been growing over the last few years, and revenue growth, which under Proposition 2.5 coincidentally grows at about 2.5% a year. So there is a 1% mismatch with those two growth rates, and that's what you see represented in these deficits going forward into the future years. So even with no new additional adds, 24 through 27, the gap widens based on the mismatch between revenue growth and expense growth. The task force does not recommend this scenario, and neither does the select board. This brings us to scenario B. This scenario includes no new additions for FY23 for either municipal or education budgets. Fund balance closes the gap in 23, and an override is anticipated to be passed by town meeting and at the ballot box in 24. These two numbers here, the 2.8 and the 5.5, don't match the current forecast exactly because they were based on an earlier forecast that the task force had to work with when they prepared this. But the numbers are directionally accurate. Again, I would point out that this is a situation where we've added no new services to this year's budget. We're closing it with fund balance, we're conducting an override, and yet we still find FY26 and 27 are a challenge. And as the task force pointed out, The deficit beyond 25 is projected to grow to levels that would be difficult to address through the normal budget process without new revenue, reduced expenditures, or another override. Scenario C assumes all the additional requests for FY23 are added to the budget. Predictably, this results in a larger fund balance needed to fund the deficit in this coming year, FY23, as well as a larger override expected to be passed in FY24. And yet the persistent problem of the mismatch between revenue growth and expense growth comes back to haunt us again in the out years in 26 and 27. So the question of how to answer the out years is obviously one that we are thinking about. And it's one that was discussed kind of tangentially last night, if anybody was on for the discussions about Article GG, which was this new idea of a real estate transfer tax, just another one of the recommendations that came out of the task force as it related to ways to find new revenue. I just want to take a quick moment, though, to suggest that as much as we are considering budget scenario B and budget scenario C, or perhaps something in between, I think it's important for all of us to remember that the operating budget deficits are not the only issue that the taxpayer will be asked to address in the near future. We also have large capital projects in the wings. Many of these will be familiar to you. Hopefully all of them are. Each of these projects will necessitate borrowing by the town and a different kind of override in addition to whatever operating override we decide to pursue. That would be, in this case, an excluded debt override. Unlike an operating override, an excluded debt override is not a permanent tax increase, but a tax increase for the term of the borrowing to facilitate the repayment of that borrowing. Town borrowings are typically 20 years in length. I mentioned, if you recall, at the discussion earlier about the fund balance, one of the set-asides for some of the available fund balance was related to foster and the public safety facility projects. And so let me just show you this chart that the town produced. This chart shows how some of the fund balance is contemplated to defray some of the early years tax increases related to the excluded debt for foster and the public safety facility. The difference between the orange and blue bars here in FY26, 27, and 28, this gap, this is how much would be on the tax bill without the fund balance assistance. This is the savings, or this is the amount of taxes that don't show up on the bill because they're going to be defrayed from this fund balance we're going to earmark, or we are thinking of earmarking. And likewise in this year and in this year as well. So in summary, operating deficits and capital project debt must be considered from my perspective as we tackle the question of this year's budget for the town. So with that, let's turn to the education budget that's proposed. Here is the request at the top of this page. You'll note a total increase year over year of $855,000, or roughly 1.43%. Nearly all of the requested increase is related to additional requests. Again, that refers to services in addition to the current level services. At the bottom of the page, I also show the requested budget increase, excluding changes in a largely uncontrollable line item related to the acronym you see there, OOD, or out-of-district placements. These are out-of-district tuitions that Hingham Public Schools must absorb in its budget to provide critical services to certain Hingham students that are delivered outside the district. The $885,000 increase shown at the top includes additional requests as follows. These are sorted by cost, not by priority. As you consider this list, I do just want to point out that ACES, this group, the Advisory Committee, Education Subcommittee, and the Advisory Committee itself are not permitted, I believe it's under state law, to direct funds that are added to the budget for certain positions. The Advisory Committee simply recommends an amount for the overall education budget to town meeting for its consideration, and it's the school committee and the administration that allocates those resources as they see fit, as they are obviously closest to the needs. With this context, I guess I will stop here and bring in my other ACES colleagues for their comments and thoughts on the additional requests and the education budget. I think I will, at least until Tim tells me to stop. I will keep the screen sharing just in case any of my colleagues want to go back and talk about any of these slides. But I will leave it at that for the moment and turn to George, Nancy, Al, and Evan and see if anybody has any comments or thoughts they want to weigh in. Evan, you're first with a quick hand raise.
There we go. Thanks, Dave. And just a note to all of you that if you put your phone next to your hotel room key card, it will demagnetize it and you won't be able to catch your 8 p.m. call that you were rushing upstairs to get. So just a friendly fact for you all. So a couple things. I actually spoke about this last night at the end of our advisory committee meeting, and based on the town's inability to move forward with a recommendation for an override this year, I guess that puts me in a position, and I am generally always supportive of net asks from the town for things that we need to do, whether it's municipal or schools. But I really feel like we put ourselves kind of in this circular conversation around chicken and egg on budget, and I'm uncomfortable adding net new asks to a budget that already has kind of a massive gap in it that we pre-baked in last year when we thought there would be an override potentially for this year. But I think the question, and I don't know who on the school side might be able to answer it, Dave, is my understanding is that the 32 positions for the school and 4 for the town we authorized?
Yes, and 2 contractors for the schools, right?
Yep, and so most of those net new positions were added last year, but my understanding is that the schools are running in a deficit balance of talent of about 30 people that they're continuing to try to hire for whatever reason. Hard to get, the economy, just haven't been able to find the right fit for these big things. So if I look at that, and I guess I asked the question, is that the case?
Michelle, does that do you or does someone? Yeah, be my guest.
I may have, I see, I think Liza has the answer, but I'm gonna actually ask John too, if he has it as the business manager. And I'm apologize, Gary's not able to join us tonight. John, do you know the answer to?
Yeah, no, I don't have any, I mean, 30 people short. No, that's not to my knowledge. I don't know where that information is coming from.
You don't have any open heads, John? There's no open head count in the Hingham Public Schools?
I'm not saying I don't, there's probably a couple slots, Evan, that we're trying to fill that have been, but not the new positions. I mean, these would be, people that came and left, or we had a resignation. I mean, it happens throughout the whole year.
John, I don't want to get cute with resourcing either, whether it's new positions, old positions. How many total headcount positions are Hingham Public Schools trying to fill right now?
I don't know. I don't know that number.
Well, that's concerning. I mean,
So I'm sorry.
No. I'm just thinking as the kind of business manager, we'd know that, right?
What's that?
I would just think that we would, if you're trying to hire positions and fill roles, you would kind of know what that is. So maybe Liza has.
Well, I think
somebody knows that. Yeah.
Susan D'Amato, the HR director, would have that, Evan. So I will get that for you directly. I'll try to email her now and see if she's available. I'm not sure
Michelle, it's not a fire drill. I mean, it's more a point that I'm trying to make, that I guess right now, and I've always, I hope you guys understand, been a supporter of what the schools have tried to do. Based on the position that we put ourselves in as a town, which was a choice, I'm not comfortable having an advisory committee to try to parse out, what we should or should not do. I feel that there's a leadership issue, and that should come from either, Gary or Tom as to what positions absolutely need to be funded for this year. So I guess long way around to saying is, until we as a town choose to change our revenue picture, I don't think necessarily making the gap any wider at this point is a really prudent decision. And Dave, that's, I don't know how many heads are open, but that's just kind of how I feel based on what I've heard over the last couple of conversations.
Yeah, understood.
Michelle, can I respond to that?
Yeah.
Headcount. I don't have the number, Evan, but there is movement in our personnel because we've had leave of absences that so we have posted positions to fill leave of absences, that the person hasn't left yet, but there have been posted positions. There are paras that have been coming and going all year because frankly, the economy is active for people to get
Sure.
higher paying jobs.
Yep.
But we don't, I mean, when you say there's 30 people, I mean, I don't know, that doesn't mean those are 30 full-time teachers. We have over 700.
Yeah, no, but wait,
800
30,
staff.
20, 15, doesn't matter. Like,
I would also say that that is a contributing factor to the reason that our current budget is trending in a surplus mode, because we've had delays in filling certain positions. And so then as a result, we've saved dollars. It hasn't necessarily been the best outcome on behalf of the education we've been able to deliver, which is unfortunate, but it's a benefit from an accounting standpoint.
Yep.
So, but I don't have that exact number. We'd have to get that from Susan. And I think you'd have to look at it in context as well.
yeah, no, and I agree. And I actually won't get into it on this call, but I have personal anecdotal information, not anecdotal, but actual factual information about, services at the middle school being delivered to students and people unable to take those jobs on. So I guess.
Yeah, I agree. And it's
Yeah.
unfortunate. It's really sad that that's the state that all schools are in all over the country.
Right. And I think until we get fully staffed, and it's probably not a long period of time, I'm not necessarily in favor of adding more to an already difficult kind of, hole to fill.
All right. Thanks, Evan. Al, you got your hand up there. Yep.
First, Evan, I believe we were referring to the stop digging position.
Yeah.
Right.
I think
I have a question, I guess, and I'd like to take another stab at trying to understand the 1.7 million that was discussed last night. I just frankly didn't totally follow it and understand, is that recurring money or is it grant money that's not being spent, but it's one time? And I just don't feel I have a good handle on the 1.7 that was discussed last night, and hope that's a relevant question.
Yeah, no, I think it is. But I also know that I'm sympathetic to to at least the school committee's perspective, that they're also wrestling with it as new information as well. But Michelle or whoever, I mean, are you guys in a position to speak to it more today, or where do you find yourselves?
I think so. I think I can start and then maybe ask John to jump in. And thanks, Alan, for bringing it up, because I think it is important. And we got this information on Monday as well. And then we as a group haven't been able to really meet. Actually, probably this is kind of the first time we've been able to discuss it amongst ourselves. But so the 1.7, and I'll let John sort of quickly go through the math of it. But I did want to just clarify that I think the word surplus is being used, and not to parse a phrase, but I don't think, to me, surplus implies that it's money that's not needed or required, which is not necessarily the case. So right now, as John forecasts the budget for the rest of the year, it appears that there could be up to 1.7 million that will go unused this year. But that being said, we're only a third of the way through the school year, so we don't know for sure which way that could go, right? And the school department does have a laundry list of critical needs that we could use those funds for. They were appropriated at town meeting to the school to use for operations in fiscal year 22. So my personal feeling and my feeling as a school committee member and a townsperson is that, at town meeting, when we appropriate funds to be used for operations, I feel strongly that it should be used for operations and not necessarily go towards be given back to fund balance to then later be used for capital offsets, right? Because in my opinion, that's not what the townspeople voted for those funds to be used for. But that's sort of a broader conversation. So there are these funds that potentially will not get used this year. And the question will be, what will the school committee decide to do with those funds. So there's a number of options. One of those being you could turn it back to the town and then use it to offset expenses for next year. Or it could be used to offset current expenses that we have this year, or add, or not add things, but we could take care of numerous things. Like we could buy new equipment, we could upgrade technology, we could fund some enrichment programs, we could bring in more contracted services, we could do another summer acceleration program, we could buy equipment for the Traces program. So a number of things we could do with those funds. And by statute, as Dave alluded to earlier, the school committee has oversight. The budget that's allocated to us, once it's allocated to us, this committee gets to decide how those funds are spent. So that's a little bit of background. I hope that makes sense, Alan. Don, do you want to add anything? Does that make sense, Alan, or would you like to know from John sort of where, like how that 1.7, where he's projecting that to come from?
Yeah, if you could.
I might as well. Yeah, sure, John.
Yeah, no, so let me ask, so all of the ACES people and the select board, you know, you all have access to the drive that we provided, a shared drive to you, and has every document that I have. So in the document of the forecast presentation, I did itemize certain variances that I'm picking up at current. So so what, I guess where's the specific question? Because I said there's about 500,000 and 520, I don't know the exact number because I'm not looking at the document right now, of movement variances for hiring, when we hired below what the rate might be, for people coming in for departures of teachers. And, you know, so I said that there's a number of teachers that I know, you know, from special ed, I think one maybe left in October, and then, you know, there had to be a long-term sub found. There's another that couldn't get found, and it's being substituted with contract labor. So there's certainly a number of positions that have been in flux throughout the whole year. So that represents about $500,000. Now, the second big item driver of that amount is the special ed Ageouts. Okay, now those you see reflected in this budget for 23, but this is when I dug into the numbers, those Ageouts are actually starting to commence in 22. Now, I didn't pick those up in the 22 budget. The 22 budget, we started in the fall of 20, November. A lot going on there with COVID, a lot of transition within the office. I get my data from the field. There's a budget call that happens every year. I send information out to people. I says, hey, you got to tell me your information. You got to give me your data. So I get tuitions, everything that's in the 23 budget. It's all scheduled out based on what we have at the current time. So so anything in 23 would reflect any surplus or any revenues that we may, or expenses that we may have this year. It already sort of reflects those because we go from the bottom up all the time. But so those special ed Ageouts commenced in 22. You know, 11 years I've been here, I've probably seen 3 or 4 Ageouts. I mean, I don't look for them because they're usually on the schedule saying, hey, tuition ages out. And you see a residential tuition that, you know, at half rate or, you know, prorated for 8 months or whatnot at that rate. And, you know, they all get added up and it goes into the, into the budget. So when I got the schedule in 2020, I didn't see any Ageouts. I didn't bother asking about Ageouts because I don't see them that often. But some of those Ageouts that you see that show this big drop in 13, they're actually starting in 22. And that's representing about $500,000, that 516. The spending from the 21 grants, so we get we have a ton of grants, right? We have IDA grants, we have Title I grants, we have teacher quality grants, we have a number of grants. Most of the grants within our budget are always reflected as offsets, and you see them. And you see them in the budget. They're not really always budgeted at 100% because we may budget them at about 90%. There's fringe benefits that we have to pay out of them. So, but anyways, the grants have to be used, right? If they're not used by their deadline, then we have to give that grant money back. So in this one, there's spending from 21 grants towards tuitions of $181,000. So once again, now I'm using the government money or the federal money as opposed to the taxpayers' money, because I don't want to give the $181,000 back to the federal government. The underspent contracts, I mean, take that one. We have counselors. We have counselors for, it was $220,000 worth of counselors contracts. But, those are encumbered right now for usage of about 95,000. We estimated that we needed 220,000. For social emotional counseling. It wasn't until the school year started and they say, hey, do we have these thoughts? Can we get some more help in here? We need some more help. You get the more help, but then when you do a contract, you're only paying for what you order. Why it's only 95 versus 220, I don't know. But it's contract service and students are getting service, to my knowledge, to the best that the educators can provide that service. And then, then you look at the special ed transport. We couldn't find contractors to do work. They didn't have drivers early on. So we took every piece of equipment we had, we put it on the road. And, and Patrick Cunningham, he got subs to drive, and that results in savings of $103,000. So when I look at this budget, and I mean, mind you, when I see a budget of $1.7 million where, hey, what am I missing here? All I'm doing is looking for what I'm missing. Okay, and then when I can't find what I'm missing, then I start going to looking to try to find out, what the reason is. There's 700 lines, there's 700 people. I don't check off one by one on a person. But I do sort of look for the big hitters, and I come to, numbers that I think are directionally correct and somewhat representative of what we might be, from a forecast from this perspective. But things can, in fact, at any point change. They could change by several $100,000 up or down. So what if I did miss it?
So John, can I just jump in for a sec? Dave, do you mind?
Yeah, no, good.
So I kind of feel like we're deep in the bowels of like school budget sausage making that none of us really need to dwell in. No, and I feel like that's kind of your job to do with the school committee and with Gary.
Yeah.
But well, I do appreciate kind of you kind of dragging us all through this. I don't like, okay, I get it. I do think that from my perspective, and good for you for calling it out. We need to figure out where we would want to, spend any money rather than turn it back, during the balance of the year. And I think that's kind of up to the direction of Gary, because Dr. Adams hasn't started yet, and kind of you and the school committee to figure out, right?
Yeah. I mean, I agree, Evan. I just thought with Alan's question is like, people are saying, why is the money there? So I was trying to give you an explanation of why. This is the best why I know. So yeah. I don't have to say anymore. I've already said it twice or thrice. So
yeah. It's even on.
It is what it is.
Harbor Media. So
well, here we go. At the risk of offending Evan, I'm going to ask a question about this page, John. So I'm glad you talked about it. The special ed age out commencing earlier than you thought. I assume that doesn't have any impact on your projected savings in 23, right? It just was savings we realized earlier than expected.
Yeah, that's correct,
okay.
David. Yeah, because they started this year. So it's not the 1.3, that difference didn't happen in 1 year. They're actually rolling from this year into that year, right? So it's a sort of a combination of 2 years of rollouts there.
So let me just let me ask one follow-up on that, maybe kind of circling all the way back to Al's initial question. Am I correct in the assumption, and I don't have a solution for this, I just want to understand if I'm thinking about this the right way. That 516, 574, of all the numbers on this page, that's the one that's least likely to change, right? I mean, we know those students have aged out. We know we're not making those invoice payments. And it's that 516, if everything else was to go to zero because life goes on, that won't, am I right?
Yeah, unless we all of a sudden got some new transfers in or some new kids, or we had some
Right.
significant out of placements. And those always happen, Dave, right? So
I
there are a
agree.
list of people that are on the schedule right now that may go out. But between now and the end of the year, depending on when they go out, I mean, depends on how many, you know.
Understood.
You're not going to be paying the hundreds of thousands. There might be 30,000 each or
Right.
40.
No, I understand that, but I was just trying to note that I think, you know, I know how we all do some forecasting in our lives, and I know how tricky it is when you're always looking for that one piece of equipment that's not going to sink when you hold on to it. That's the one piece, it seems to me, that absent new entrants from a special ed perspective, you know, that's money we just truly don't have to spend anymore. And that's okay. And when you've made the recommendation, or you made the suggestion the other night about putting that in a special reserve fund, I mean, obviously that makes perfect logical sense. Or, you know, putting some of this, if it survives the year, into the special ed fund. Obviously, we all want to protect ourselves against that. So I get it. So happy to move on from this page. John, thank you for that suggestion. George, you've been patient. Your arm must be very tired. So I'll see you next.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dave. And let me first of all say I thought your intro and your slides and presentation were, you know, a great setup for where we are right now. But at the risk of being a little redundant, I'm going to ask you to bring up your slides again.
Yep. Figure out this screen sharing thing one way or another. Okay.
So scroll. I want to see the page where you summarize the. No,
Which one?
maybe up higher.
What are you looking for? What info are you looking for?
I want to go back to the tuitions and the age out on the tuitions. So
Oh, sorry, John's slide deck. I mean, John's presentation.
No. I think you showed it first, where you showed the summary of the school.
Oh yeah,
School
sorry,
budget.
coming. Yep, there it is.
There it
Here.
is. Yeah. So, well, maybe it's on. So I'm just trying to get my hands around this aging out number, because we're using a number in 23, and we're comparing it to the number in 22, and we're projecting a savings of some, I guess, $1.3 million. But the 22 number, we've now discovered, is going to be off by about $500,000. Right? So we're actually not going to spend $2.7 million in 22. We're only going to spend $2.1 million. If I'm reading this correctly.
That's how I understand it too.
Yeah, that's
Right.
correct.
So if the savings for 23 is the delta between the 23 number and the 22 number, and we're off by $500,000, isn't that going to increase the school budget by $500,000 next year? Because the savings is not there.
No, it's not. It shouldn't increase it. I mean, the schedule, that reflection. So we're just looking budget to budget here. So that drop is from budget to budget. And you know, if like say 22 are correct, you're right. Instead of seeing 13.4, you'd see 7. But the next year, so if everything stayed the same and you added up the tuitions for all of the students that I say are in 23, and you added the same students in 24, you're going to be about the same number, up maybe 3 to 5% for tuition.
All right, but so John, if just from the way that I would look at it, So the 23 budgets are going to be $1.3 million. And the 22 expenses are going to be about $2.1 million. So the savings between the actual expense and the 23 budget is going to be about $800,000. It would be the way that I would look at it. I understand that you're looking at it, comparison between a budget of one year and a budget of another year, which gives you the 1.3, but in actuality, the number is really about $800,000. Okay.
And we'll
right,
probably
thank you.
know that, George, we'll probably know that right at the end of the year when we get the actual number. So, I mean,
Right.
we're always in a tough point, but we are looking budget to budget.
Yeah,
And that's really what is that's the driver for the overall forecast too. It's always
Right,
budget
right.
to budget. And then, even in the regular forecast, you're saying, here's the budget for, 22, and here's the budget for 23, and they're looking at comparisons there. And
No,
you see that
I-
those different actuals in 21,
yeah, I get it, John, and I understand how you present the information to us. Is a budget versus a budget instead of a budget versus an actual. It's just a different philosophy, and it's not an issue that we need to spend a lot of time on right
Because I
now.
can't
But
get
I
you
do
actual
want to
now.
go back to some of the points that were made a little bit earlier and add my 2 cents to it. And first of all, let me say, I make no judgment on any of the requested positions. I mean, I've heard some information about why they're needed, and I'm not making a judgment that they're excessive, they're absolutely necessary, whatever. I'm just taking them at face value of what you present as this is what you guys need. But from where I'm sitting, we as a town have a structural budget issue. We have a funding issue. We simply do not have reliable, steady funding for the current budget, and we certainly don't have any for the proposed budget that we're looking at right now. And to my mind, the decision on what we spend is really a decision that rests with the voters. And I think that's, whether you like it or you don't like it, but that's the concept of Prop 2.5. We live within our means. If we decide we want to spend more money, then we go to the voters and we say, you need to raise your taxes because these are services that we think are valuable. And we let the voter make that decision. Another thing that troubles me at this point as I look at the budget is that we're in the midst of doing a strategic plan. And we're in the midst of doing a staff audit, neither one of which are done. And yet it seems to me both of them are fairly critical pieces or provide fairly critical pieces of information to how we go forward. And I don't know what's going to come out of those, and I know you guys don't either, but it's possible there are going to be some great ideas in terms of efficiencies or staffing or who knows what it is. But it seems to me, if we've got these big studies going on, that it's hard to make decisions to spend additional money until we know what the results of these studies are. So it bothers me that these studies are ongoing and will not be done in the short-term future. Having said that, it seems to me that we, as a town and as a school system, we need to use the available resources that we have, certainly at least in the short term. And what bothers me, and I know, John, you and I have had some conversations around this up to this point, is that you all are sitting on some $3 million in fees. And annually, you roll over $3 million in fees. And annually, you spend about $3 million in fees. So some of these fees, I understand, are restricted in a very tight manner, and others are ones where You have got a lot more flexibility on what gets spent. But it seems to me, if you're reserving a whole year's worth of fees, there might very well be an opportunity in there to use some of these fees to fund certain positions. And while I'm on the subject of fees, I would also note that many of these fees are significantly below our benchmark communities, and they haven't been raised in a number of years. And during the Sustainable Budget Task Force, there was talk about a bus transport fee, which apparently is used by a number of communities of our benchmark communities. So long story short, it seems like there's an opportunity here. There's a separate revenue source that is available to the school system. And using that separate revenue source takes away from operating budget monies that are currently being used to subsidize some of these activities. So, I mean, to me, that seems like there's an opportunity there that could be utilized, at least in the short term, in a different manner than it has been to this point. So anyway, that's all I have, Dave, at this point.
George, thanks. Nancy.
Thanks, Dave. First of all, John, I would be remiss to not start with, because I haven't had an opportunity to do it in real life, but to thank you for all of your stewardship of the schools during your tenure. You've done a remarkable job, and we will miss that, your steady hand. So I wanted to start with that, but then moving on to the budget and the forecast now. One of the things, John, is you've always pointed out, it's a humbling experience, and I would say I paid a lot more attention to the school budget before I got more involved in town, and now sitting on AdCom, I can 100% appreciate your sentiments of how humbling budgeting and forecasting is. But that said, we as a town have a lot to be proud of, because the town budgets within, we've got a very large budget, $100 and some million budget, and we budget within 1%. And that's admirable for all of our departments, that's done every year, year over year. And it's frustrating. It's really frustrating. I echo George's problem. I think this is my 4th year on AdCom, and I can tell you that it is wrenching every year to sit in front of every department in town that has critical needs, the schools, the fire, police, DPW, and struggle with how to cover all the critical needs in town with finite resources. And yes, we do have the lever of an override, but I think for those of us that have been through several overrides, we know that those should be used prudently. But I think that coming out of last year's town meeting, we're all in agreement that an override is very much needed right now. And so we're all working really hard to how do we best set up the departments, and how do we best set up our citizens to make the right or make a good decision and an informed decision at town meeting about those costs. And I'm, I would say that I was really pessimistic about this year until last night. And I was very, very concerned about last year having made a decision to fund 38 positions that had no sustainable revenue source attached to them. And finding ourselves a year later to be in the exact same position is daunting. It's frustrating, and it's, from my perspective, it's scary. And so it is, I am not lying to say that it, as I'm sure for a lot of the people on this call tonight. It's something that's been keeping us up at night. But last night, I kind of had like a, oh my gosh, I think there might be a path forward where we can get what I would say our citizens are telling us are the most critical needs in town funded in a way that we can bridge ourselves to next year. And then I think collectively, we as the AdCom, as the school department, as the select board, have to have our kumbaya moment and agree that we are going to come out of town meeting this year and begin immediately to start the hard work to get to the funding sources for this that we need to get to next year. But my aha moment, you know, there's two positions in town that we've, and like George, I don't want to start playing, you know, what position is more critical to whom, because everybody that has put forward additional expenses, those are critical needs to them. And so I don't want to start playing a game of whose needs are more important. We are one town and our town has needs. But the two that seem to be nearest and dearest to at least the loudest groups of citizens in town, and I respect the passion with which they have come to all these meetings, and I have equally been passionate coming to meetings before. So I understand that passion, that driving passion. But I think we can get there. I think we can meet those two critical needs that those passionate people feel that have kept them up late at night with us on meetings. And those two are the sustainability coordinator, which I just said wrong. And then the second one is the fine arts director. And I've really been struggling with the fine arts director, and, you know, we're kind of in an odd position at AdCom because we legally, we can't tell you how to spend the money that is spent to the school board. So to the school department. So all that's sent to the school department is a large sum of money. And then it's, you know, your position to determine where that money gets spent. And that's legally your right. And it's absolutely your right, as you're the closest to the needs and you're the experts in that way. But one of the things that struck me last night when reviewing, kind of going back over a lot of the letters that had come in from citizens, is that one of the driving thoughts of a lot of the mainly parents, but I would say citizens as well, of the need for the fine arts director. One of the recurring theme in a lot of those letters is that there's an equity issue here, and it's an equity issue up against athletics. And I have both athletes and artists in my family, in my three kids. And so we've used both of those. And I will equally echo that frustration that it's just the nature of our town, that we're a very athletic town, and which is awesome. But it does sometimes feel a little out of balance. It occurs to me when I'm looking at the fund balances that on the school side, that the athletic fee, the last memo that I got, sorry, my computer of course shut off while we're sitting here. But there's about just under $900,000 in the athletic fee fund. And it occurs to me is there a bridge to the fine arts director to, as a one-time equity adjustment, to take $120,000 out of that fund and put it towards the fine arts director, and bridge it, use that as a bridge until it gets incorporated into the school budget that would be put forward next year as part of an override. and I know that a lot of the funds on both sides, and the municipal side and the school side, have restrictions to how they can be spent, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm not here to try to redo all the good work that you do. But when I was reading from the citizens this idea of an equity issue, it occurred to me that that may be one way that we as a town can relieve take some pressure off that lever. So I just offer it up as an idea.
Nancy, thanks. I don't know. Anybody, Michelle?
Thanks. I was thinking a couple of things to follow up on for both George and Nancy's perspectives. And so not a direct answer to Nancy's question about whether that is a path forward. I'm not sure if that athletic fund is sort of fungible and can be used someplace else, but certainly something we can look at. And I think I echo, though, Nancy, your optimism after last night and the last couple of days. I mean, I definitely do think there is a path forward here. You know, the budget ask on the school side was, relatively speaking, a small percentage wise, right? Because we did right size, gratefully, thank you, last year's budget, which helped really, you know, keep the asks to a relative minimum this year. And I think it's funny, I was just thinking to myself that I think so much of the frustration might be a strong word, but so much of this is like, we realize like how unwieldy a school budget is, right? Sort of compared to some of the other budgets in town, because we're dealing with little human beings, right? And we're dealing with lots of employees and 6 buildings and a restaurant and transportation services, right? There's just so much that goes into it. And it sort of dawned on me, I'm like, oh, I guess that's why the state decided that the schools are different than other municipal departments in that we get allocated a sizable amount of money and we get to decide how we're going to spend it. Because I'm like, I guess that makes sense, because it is so unwieldy. And to John's point, sort of as he's outlined for everyone, how we appear to be, we have all this unexpensed or unspent funds so far this year. It really is because of all the unwieldiness, right? Transportation changes, special ed changes, the changes in staffing. So that sort of popped into my head while we were all talking. I think that part of the consternation is that it's just such an unwieldy budget to manage. And so appreciate everyone who's sticking through this process with us as we go through it. And I think one thing, George, you had pointed out, it was a good point about the fees and how we benchmark against other communities. And I agree with you, there are certain fees that are lower than some of our benchmark communities. And there are also fees that we're over on, right? Like a lot of our benchmark communities don't charge for kindergarten, right? So I think when you look at our fee structure overall compared to the benchmark towns, I think we're pretty level when it comes to that, because we do charge for full day kindergarten where many of our benchmark districts don't. As a matter of fact, I think the vast majority of districts in the Commonwealth don't charge for full day kindergarten like as Hingham does. So anyway, those were just my sort of off the cuff remarks, but agree again with Nancy that I think there is a path forward here that we can get to with a little help from AdCom, a little help from us. I think we can make this work.
Michelle, one thing though on the athletic revolving fund, Nancy, we are saving money in there for the turf replacement. So that entire fund, it like we've allocated money for, because we know the turf field is going to have to be replaced, and we've been designating that. And then also John assigned more from the athletic revolving fund this year than other years to keep the athletic budget flat for fiscal year 23. So I know where you're coming from,
Liza, because we've got the same thing on the fund balance on the municipal side, which is being earmarked to offset Foster and the public safety facility. So we I totally get what you're saying, that you have funds, but we're also kind of in a unique, weird year. So
I totally hear you, and when it's my turn to talk on this whole thing, I'll talk. I have a different perspective. I hear where you're coming from. I have ideas on other ways of doing it.
Let me just quickly go wrap up with ACES and then we'll move on to the school committee. Al, go ahead.
So it was going to be where I was going to end was sort of what are we trying to get at tonight? But I guess quickly where my position is, I guess, and part of what I wanted to confirm in asking my question earlier, to a fault, I understand there is gray in between black and white normally. It's a legitimate fault. This just strikes me as clear. I mean, we don't have the money, and whether if these positions are so important, go and hire them. And you've got, whether it's the 1.7 or whether it's to the point of the town, and the town last year appropriated money for the school to spend, and we actually overspent because there was the 1 year adjustment because of COVID. And we said, okay, this is a crisis. We're going to do something we shouldn't do. We're going to use one-time money to fund recurring expenses, and we're going to put it before the town. And we did that, and we haven't put it before the town yet. And, we still don't have the money. And so I feel very strongly we got to stop digging. And we appropriated that money. If these positions are super important, and I in my head, I want to say, well, then don't hire or something, but it's not my role to say. That's the point, is here's your money. This is what the town has given us. Go forth and use it as best suits the education system in Hingham. And we trust you all to go do it. And until the town has given us more resources to do it, we don't do it. I'd like a new car, or I'd want my kids to have a new car. And if they went off and did it and then came back and said, oh, I bought a new car, Dad, we want you to pay for it, I'd be pretty mad. And so I'd be pretty mad if I was a resident of Hingham and somebody went off and spent my money without me telling them they could. And so I wish you all the best in spending the money you've been given. And then, going and happy to be a productive, positive part of the discussion about asking the town for what more resources are needed and why. And so, yeah, and then, Mr. Chairman, curious about what the process is.
No, thanks. Yep, makes sense. Thanks for that comment out. So yeah, no, my hope tonight is that I'll turn it over to the school committee, hear whatever thoughts they'd like to weigh in, either with respect to kind of the context, the budget itself, the proposal. We'll then open it up for public questions and comments. And then I think we close it with with ACES making a recommendation. And so you can imagine what a couple options are, from fund it all to fund none and everything in between. And so I would like ACES to vote tonight on a number that we can recommend to AdCom for their consideration on Thursday, based on what we heard from Julie, the chair of AdCom, earlier today. I think it's likely that Thursday will be a discussion with AdCom about the ACES recommendation and how that recommendation fits into the context of the overall budget, which AdCom is responsible for, and then likely a vote on the full budget takes place next Tuesday. So my hope, Al, is that this would, will theoretically be the ACES meeting to make that decision, and we'll then take it up with AdCom as we move the ball forward. Okay. Other questions? Are there folks on the school committee that want to share some thoughts? Carlos? Hi.
Mr. Chair, fellow members of the advisory and school committee, and parents participate in this meeting. We thank you all for everything that you have done to actually help us present balanced budgets all these years. The advisory or the ACES in the advisory have been, for the most part, very generous and have listened to our requests. I think this budget has been a very conservative budget. As a matter of fact, we on the school committee usually don't vote always before EdCon and the Board of Selectmen have taking a position, but we decided that we wanted to be in sync with the, EdCon and the Board of Selectmen, and fairness, support the suggested, the recommended budget of the superintendent. As you see, the number it's been very conservative. There is many positions that we have not been put forth because we understand that there is not a lot of money. But it's not the job of the school committee either to find the revenue. But we have, on the last at least 6 years that have been on the school committee, have been trying to think outside of the box and offer suggestions for ways that the town may have be able to find new sources of revenue. And I think we all wanted to work together with other bodies to ensure that we have enough resources so we can continue providing the quality of education that we moved to this town for. I, for one, let me tell you, I'm sick and tired of explaining to people that if the quality of our education goes down, so does the price of your homes. So I am here now respectfully asking ACES to please recommend the budget as presented, because we have been very conservative, and we would appreciate. We understand, the difficulty and not having revenue, but we know that without saying it much, the money is on the reserves. It's for that. It's for the rainy fund, for the rainy day. So let's use it. If it's not sustainable, look, for many years we have not welcomed fast food restaurants in Hingham. Have you thought about that? But you know what? Like I said, it's not my job. It's not the school committee jobs to find new sources of revenue. The suggestions that we have made in the past are good suggestions. I'm going to leave at that. But anyhow, respectfully, I would say kindly recommend this budget to the full advisory and so on to the selectmen, so we can present to voters like somebody said, but I think Dennis, let the voters decide what's the number should be, and let's continue providing good quality education to our kids. Thank you.
Thank you, Carlos. Ness?
Yeah, I echo what Carlos said. Thank you for all your work. Thank you for your volunteerism. I know that it is challenging and much appreciated. I think, I do agree that we put up a conservative budget here, and we put in the needs that we think are necessary. And we've gone through this pandemic. We knew that we have been a lean district for years. We now have had 3 superintendents who have said the same thing. We need to start listening to the educational experts when they tell us that they are running lean. And we've seen the cracks. And, when I keep making this analogy that when we have a superintendent who has to go through and pull out detail for vaccinations, it's just not okay. We can't function like that, because then the superintendent can't do the business of the superintendent, and it trickles down. I know that, John and his team work incredibly hard looking at our benchmark towns, because that's what we do here. We see another district who have a team of double the size of ours. And so when we ask the questions, well, how do we not know about Ageouts, or how do we not know about this? The reason is because we don't have the staff to do it, to come to the right answers. And so mistakes are made, and we just can't get to the right answer at the end of the day. And I feel like we're on this hamster wheel where we know what the right answer is. We've done the work through the Sustainable Budget Task Force, really proud of the work. We know that we need an override. We cannot sustain this structural deficit. We've got the Prop 2.5, which only allows us to go up the tax levy by the 2.5%, but we know our expenses are more than that. So I think, as Dave Anderson had said during one of our meetings, the Prop 2.5 was to force the conversations, force our town to have these important conversations. And the people on advisory committee, school committee, select board, they are the leaders of the town, and the people of the town, the citizens are looking to us to make the right decisions. They expect us to make the right decisions because we are engaged day in and day out. And that's why when we present a budget last year with 36 positions and the select board and advisory and school committee all get behind it, nobody batted an eye. And I think we have to stop. We just have to be the leaders that we all are and tell the town this is how we move forward. As we were listening to the master plan process, people expect excellent schools, and we need to be able to provide that. We've been able to get by in the years past because we've had new development, but with that new development comes more people and more expectations. So eventually the buck stops here and those services catch up to us. And I think we're there. We can't continue to develop and not provide the services that citizens are expecting. I echo what Carlos said. If our schools are faltering, people are going to stop moving here. It is the first thing that people look for, young families look for when they are deciding where to move. So the cracks are showing. I know that we need to figure out next year through the work that we did with the Sustainable Budget Task Force, through the strategic plan and the classroom audits. I think things will shake out, and we need to continue having these discussions. But I think the budget that we put forward are the needs of the district right now. We talk about the fine arts director. Those are the outward facing positions that the parents know about. What they don't necessarily appreciate is the day in, day out needs of the central office. And so when they are frustrated that we can't get certain things done, the reason why is because we don't have these needs filled. And I think it's critical in order to move us forward. And I don't want to set up another superintendent for, a rough road. We need to set this person up for success. We need this person to be successful. We cannot lose another superintendent. We will not be able to attract qualified people to run our schools anymore. So thank you.
Thanks, Ness. Liza?
Okay, thanks. So first I want to comment on a couple of the presentations. So Dave, you showed a slide of a year-over-year change of 3.74% if you remove the out of district tuition changes. And I'd like to note that yes, that's more than 3% that the Sustainable Budget Task Force has set as a target, but that's also because we're still trying to right size the district. That was the reason for these requests, especially the administrative positions and the fine arts director. The fine arts director is a state mandated position as well. So we haven't corrected yet. And so I think you have to take that into consideration at the increase rate of, that's why it continues to be there, because we're still climbing out of the structural deficit that was created when the override for eSchool was taken away. So that's just one note. George, as far as the bus fees go, that would be a dramatic philosophical change of how we've managed bus transportation forever in Hingham, of establishing a bus fee. And it's something that the school committee talked briefly about, of yes, it's something to consider and to evaluate, but imposing brand new fees at this point would be impossible to do for next year. And I think, I listened to the discussion last night with the select board and the advisory committee about the transfer fee. And so I think you're going through that same issue right now with that one, that to impose a brand new philosophical change of charging more money is very difficult to do in 1 year. So respectfully, I think, you know, we need to take a little pass on that one for right now. But
I guess,
we
Liza,
have,
if I could just respond to that, is, you know, it's not necessarily something you have to do right now, but as part of the normal due diligence, you look at other districts and say, what fees are you charging? You know, and maybe this should have been looked at 3, 4, 5 years ago, not necessarily, you know, when we're on the cusp of a big issue. So, I mean, I just wanted to respond to that one.
yep, and it was discussed many times in the past. And philosophically, it was something that was felt by the school committee that it's important to get every child to school every day. And we also renegotiated the bus contracts to save $1 million at the time when we changed from first student to hours. So we've constantly been looking at that cost structure for transportation. And then Alan, I agree with you that we have to use the funds that we have. But one thing that the school committee has not had a chance to talk about, and that I'd like to propose tonight, is how do we use some of the identified excess funds from fiscal year 22 to apply to fiscal year 23? Because last night, the select board, in fact, voted to increase the town budget by $76,241, including the sustainability director, and they voted to increase the school budget by $120,240 for a fine arts director. But they had no discussion as to where the revenue was going to come from to cover the additional $186,481 in the budget.
Which is insane.
And so, and they left it to advisory and ACES to come back with a recommendation, and they would be considering to revote. So, you know, that puts you guys in a tough position. I get that. So and you know, to my fellow school committee members, and to John, we haven't had a chance to get into this and talk about this. So I'm just going to throw some things out there of how I would like, one proposal of how we can use some of these excess funds. Now, John identified potential budget variance of $1.7 million. He's already allocated and offered up to the town $400,000 of ESSER funds to balance the town budget. That's included in that one-time fee. So we're down to $1.3 million really of potential budget variance. Our requests for the fiscal 23 budget that were removed were $850,609. If people's following my numbers right. So if we could find a way of funding that $850,609 from the remaining variance, that would still leave the school department with $481,818 of that variance for anything that comes up the rest of the year. I don't know if that is practical or appropriate. So that's a question that I have to ask of John or others. Now, if we look at these, what we would apply to fiscal 23, we have the 400,000 that's already applied to make a balanced budget. You know, John, can we apply 516 in ESSER fund, another 516 in ESSER funds? That's about, I have some calculations here of that's, I'd have to get into where I came up with this number. And then if we put 334,609 back to the reserve fund, could we identify it out of the reserve fund for the fiscal 23 school department budget? And then that gets us to the 1.25 million that we need from this variance to fill the town budget. And
Liza, have we walked extremely far off the reservation tonight, as this is an advisory committee, ACES subcommittee, like the town budget, we need the select board and the quote unquote CEO of our town to step in and show some leadership. What we're responding to right now tonight is the school budget, right, Dave?
Well,
Stop.
Evan, yeah, no, I agree, but I'm happy to let Liza go with this. I mean, we're on a very short timeline, and I know that the surplus is a question, and I'm certainly open to hear thoughts. So, I mean, I'm fine with it. Liza, go ahead and continue.
I mean, you know,
Dave, I
Evan,
wonder if I could just interrupt. I mean, I appreciate, Liza, what you're trying to do on the fly here, but I mean, just trying to follow numbers that are being popped up into the air and stuff. I mean, is it better that if Liza could put her thoughts onto paper and just email them in to us and we could look at them?
Well, I do think that would be helpful, but let me ask the question this way, Liza. I mean, I have heard, let me just put it this way. I've not heard from John or frankly anybody in describing the surplus that it is. I mean, I've heard suggestions that it's not a surplus and that by the end of the year, a lot of it will be used. And I totally get that. And I will tell you that I may be, unlike some of my other colleagues, do not see the 1.7 and think that's the solution to all of our problems. I recognize it's the middle of the year. I recognize what forecasting is, requires. And so I would be uncomfortable on the fly, certainly, and even with writing on numbers that weren't solid, that if you're going to hire someone you want to hire them with money, not with a hope. So all I'm saying is that I do agree with George that it would be really useful to get from you. If you have thoughts, we obviously would welcome them. I can't write this down and do the math in my head overnight. And I'm also reticent to given what I've heard from your other colleagues, to know how much confidence we have in where this surplus is ultimately going to shake out on June 30th, 2022.
I completely 100% agree with you. The problem and my challenge with my fellow school committee members is that we got this information on Monday. Also on Monday, we saw the forecast that all of our requests were removed. And so we have to post a meeting for us to be able to talk about this.
No, I understand.
And so that's my, that's the problem and the dilemma that we're in, is that, and then you guys are on a timeline, and I get it that, we're throwing numbers around, but I guess even conceptually, would the advisory committee be open to even this concept of transferring some of this variance over to use for fiscal 23, so that we could get back these critical positions, particularly, I don't know where you're going to fund the fine arts director from. I mean, that's one of my, responding to Nancy's question is, could some of this variance go for that? And then, just the idea of moving some of the ESSER funds, which we know we can do, to fiscal 23, and identifying some for the reserve fund.
So
Because otherwise it all goes
hold
back
on.
to the reserve
All right.
fund.
Good,
Well, I
before my
understand.
head pops right off, Dave.
Well, I hear you, Liza, and I guess I will say to you, I don't know what to say other than, the schedule is the same schedule we've had for the budget for time immemorial. So it shouldn't be a surprise that we're in the short strokes here on the budget. That's number one. Number two, I am not in a position, I don't think, to make any determination without, the most important person in AdCom's council, Sue Nickerson's, about where we can move money and what we can hold it for, and all of those things that go with that. So I certainly tonight cannot opine as to our willingness or our ability to do this. I mean, I guess I kind of come back to my initial presentation, which is to say, and I know you and I have talked about this many years, we have a pretty limited role, right? I mean, ACES has got to come up with a number that in our determination, we can recommend to the advisory committee that fits in the budget in our best guess. And we have a forecast, we have a budget, we have a number we have to put into that. And I'm not trying to minimize it, but I'm saying that beyond that, I'm happy to try to be thoughtful and creative. But on the other hand, you know, we have before us what we have before us. And I as much as I appreciate the creativity, I haven't heard anything. And I wouldn't ask anybody in the school side to commit that there's going to be a number certain out of this surplus by June 30th. And if you're suggesting that we
I'm not asking
could somehow
you, Dave.
vote that.
I'm
well, then-
actually not asking you. I'm asking my fellow committee members and John for a response as well. I mean, I apologize. I am more, I hope you can tell, I'm more frustrated with this whole process this year than ever in my career. And it bothers me that we've been asking to adjust this budget for over 5 years. And that this year we finally got the Sustainable Budget Task Force to address it, and that we still can't get anywhere.
So,
That's
Liza,
my
I
ultimate
understand the
frustration.
frustration.
And then we find this out and we're trying to, you know, we're all this at the last minute, which this year it seems more extreme than it's ever been. So that's my frustration, and I'm trying to address what the needs are, and I'm trying to work within the open meeting law of getting the chance to actually have a conversation with people, and the worst is having it over Zoom. So I apologize for my attitude, but that's where I am.
Well, I understand, and I don't mean to minimize that, and I appreciate your passion for this, and I would never question it over the years, and I'm grateful for it. I guess what I would say is that I don't think that we can make our meeting tonight a school committee work session on the variance. I don't, not that it's not important and not that it shouldn't be, but there's a lot of people on the line, parents and otherwise, who I want to make sure have a chance to say whatever they have on their mind. And I guess, like I said, I welcome any school committee member or John Ferris to say right now definitively, here's money that can be spent with no questions. And I haven't heard that in the 2 nights that I've heard the descriptions of the surplus. So I'm trying to be respectful of the fact that the surplus is a moving target. I understand that. I appreciate it's frustrating, but the last thing I want to do is ask someone to make a hasty determination of those funds that are fungible at the moment, appropriately so. It's March, whatever it is, and the school year ends months hence. So, you know, if anybody on the school committee, I'm sorry, I don't mean to cut you off, Liza, and I know where you're going with it, but I can't, I don't know what else I can say in the context of this meeting and our own agenda, which isn't, you know, we're not posted to discuss the use of school fund surpluses either. So I guess we both have to try to keep our eyes on the lines. Michelle?
Thank you. Liza, thank you so much. I fully appreciate what you're trying to do. And Dave, appreciate you giving us some leeway to try to hash some of this out, because, you know, we've said it 100 times already, but right, it's kind of new information. And while we're still in the typical timeline, I think some of this information was a little late breaking news. I think that, so we as a committee will have to sit down and figure out, work with John and figure out, you know, what the forecast looks like, and look at it probably week by week through the finance subcommittee and through full school committee meetings of what we can do if there is going to be, what number that's going to be, what that budget variance is going to be, sort of as we go. And to Alan's point, you're absolutely right. The town gave us $61 million last year to spend, and we will spend it this year, because that's what the townspeople told us to do, and that's what we will do. So I'm not sure that there will be any funds, to your point, Dave, left over to give back. The one thing that I would say is that in a perfect world, or an even okay world, right, we would have had the strategic plan done and we would have had the staff audit done. But for reasons that we all know, we weren't able to get those things done. The issue is that waiting to get those things done, there are nearly 4,000 kids in this town who are relying on us to provide educational services to them next year. Regardless of what the grown-ups were able to do or were unable to do, we still have an obligation to those nearly 4,000 students. And that's what concerns me if we don't get the funding that we asked for. Will we find a way to make it work and provide the best education that we can for these students? Yes, because that's what the schools do every single year. Will it be easy to do? Probably not, but frankly, it's really never easy to do. But I do just want to say that when we go to town meeting and we tell people what we need, they've given us what we needed. So to the point of, well, the town's going to give you what they're going to give you, I think the town's going to give us what we ask for, right? So if we just ask for level services, that's what they're going to give us. But if we explain the need, which I think we have over the last 2 years, last year the town showed us by unanimous vote and 0 questions at town meeting, yes, we agree with what you're saying. There's a need in this town to use some of the money we have in fund balance to fund all our municipal departments, including police, fire, and the schools. And I think that when we work together and explain the situation and explain what we need, the town does show up and supports what we need. So I would just ask that we told you what we need. That's our job, right? Our job is to tell you what the needs of the school are, and we've given that to you. And I'm just hopeful that you can help support the budget, or as much of the 850,000 that you can support on behalf of the students and on behalf of the rest of the taxpayers, and see what they decide at town meeting.
Michelle, thanks. Al, you're back up on my screen.
Real quick story relevant to the topic at hand. I was the legislative director at the Ways and Means Committee at the House of Representatives for a bunch of years back in the 90s. And we had a bunch of years, people remember, where the state was awash in money. And putting together the budget was very hard. And then we, in 1998, doing the 99 budget, .com crashed, the state budget crashed. It was awful. And I remember when we finished that budget season, the guy who was the chairman at the time, Paul Haley, who's state rep from Weymouth, and Tom Finneran was the speaker at the time, said, you know, the hardest thing I've ever had to do was manage a budget when we had lots of resources. Because one of the easiest things I've ever had to do is go through this budget, because I couldn't do anything but say no. It's not a matter of being generous or stingy or a good guy or a bad guy or understanding or not understanding or being pro school or pro town or whatever. It's the money's not there. It's it's just not. And so it's, you can't spend money you don't have. And until the money's there, which again, I'm happy to be a productive part of being the effort to ask the town for more and to meet the needs. That's where we are.
Al, thanks. Evan, I see your hand, but I'm going to let Tim go next since he hasn't spoken yet. And I want to make sure his microphone works.
Well,
I'm the newbie. I'm
mine's
just trying
gonna
to
be
keep
good
up.
though, Dave. Yep.
I know it's going to be good. I'm saving the best for last.
Okay.
Tim, go ahead.
Just a quick question. The one spot in the budget that I think there's extra money in is the driving force of the variance this year is the $103,000 for the difficulty of hiring. That problem is getting significantly worse and will be very significantly worse next year. I would be shocked if that wasn't double the variance next year than it was this year. Teachers are leaving education like rats off the Titanic, and there's not the army of young people entering the field. So positions are very difficult to hire, especially looking at special ed positions, foreign language positions, math, some of the specialized positions. So I'm wondering if there was a way to reflect that sort of crisis that is coming in education in our budget, even though I think that crisis will be felt less in Hingham than it will be felt in other areas of the country, but we felt it this year already, so it's only getting worse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Thanks, Tim.
I guess that was an actual question of maybe for John, if there's any way to
sorry.
kind of show that in the budget for this year.
I
I assume we're budgeting at 100% staffing.
Yeah, I mean, we have to, I mean, I would not be comfortable. You mean, like, put a plug in to like not go to 100%? I mean, what we really do, Tim, is schedule the people, and we need that. And like, yeah, is there some delays and whatnot? You know, I mean, conceptually, you know, you could do that, but you know, but I think we do that. We do that with the revolving funds, right? That's really what that throttle is. It's like we could goose it up, we can take it down to sort of make those adjustments. So, I mean, that's one method of doing that. But I mean, we also talked about that in sustainable budget. You know, should we like budget $500,000 over because we know we give money to fund balance every year? Not bad concepts. I mean, from a business standpoint, I'd love to do it. To get government to move in that direction is another thing entirely.
All right, thanks, John. Jen.
Sorry, thank you. And I apologize. Earl, I apologize earlier for my inappropriate reaction emojis that were popping up on the screen. I was trying to raise my hand, so.
I didn't even see him. You can try
maybe
again.
gave someone a good chuckle, but
I'm the only one
well,
that gets the inappropriate emoji smackdown, so good for
well,
you,
it's
Jen.
just in the wrong amount of time. But anyway, I digress. No, I just, you know, I think back to the Herculean effort that, you know, was put forth last year by the advisory committee, and you know, for your great guidance and the select board and the school administration and our committee. And it was a strong collaboration effort to address the needs of the students for fiscal year 22 budget. And I'm grateful for our town for approving it. And for this year, you know, we listed what we needed, and one of those is the fine arts director, you know, to oversee all those art opportunities for our children. We're 2 years later, we're still asking for this position. And, you know, we need to maintain and build upon the quality of the schooling, and the reason why people have moved here for, why the community people have moved here for. And I you know, and I think I said this last night, you know, the community members pointed out the inequity compared to our sports programs. And we really, I just feel so strongly that we just need to show how much we value the arts in this town. And I understand, you know, the things that have, you know, come up in the last few days with the 1.7, and I understand that, you know, it makes things complicated, but I just really wish that we can work together here to find a way to make this work. That's all.
Thanks, Jen. Evan, against my better judgment.
All right. So only once in my professional career have I showed up for the wrong meeting. And I feel like in the last 90 days, I feel like I keep showing up for the wrong meeting. So I just want to clarify, because there's a lot of people on this call and a lot of folks who may be newer to the process. And it is enormously frustrating to me, but at the advisory committee, of which I'm a member of, we don't get to drive policy, right? We are a deliberative body put forth to take a look at what the budgets are. And so by the time it gets to us, you know, the school budget reconciliation policy process has to have happened before it comes to us. So while I appreciate kind of the on the fly math that we're trying to do, this is the wrong meeting to do that in. And you compounded in that is as I see, and as I'm sure folks on the advisory committee are going to roll their eyes, the complete abdication in town leadership duty in punting the budget problem to next year, when we kind of all agreed we would take care of it this year. So as I don't allow in my personal life, unfortunately, in this particular life, we have set up yet another impossible situation. And so I a huge supporter of the schools. I hope everybody on the school committee knows that. I just, until somebody, and we are not the policy-making body and advisory committee, we have said in the last 3 town warrants, in some way, shape, or form, that a override was going to be necessary in the coming years. Dave, you can check my math on that one, but I'm pretty sure in the 2 or 3 page document that we write that goes into the town warrant, we've said that. And we're now looking out to next year to do that. So where we are tonight is kind of staring down the barrel of choosing to make the hole bigger or not. And I cannot, in good conscience, based on the other decisions that have been kind of presupposed before we came to this meeting, agree to make that gap any bigger. So as much as I'd love to fund all the requests that are out there, you know, we can only deal with the math that's in front of us, and it's not pretty. So, you know, responding to a couple of the things that have been said here, you know, I'm with you, but it is not up to the advisory committee to determine what the best policy is for schools or the town. It is only our responsibility to take a look and balance the budget. And no one has given us a situation where any of us are going to look good in this process. So as frustrating as it is, unfortunately, it rolls downhill and it's rolled to the bottom of the hill. And that's why we're talking about this tonight. So I couldn't be any more clear over the last 2 or 3 months, but this is a problem that should have been solved before we got to tonight. And so Dave has always kind of brought us through this with a sense of grace and dignity that I could never accomplish in an evening, but there's not a lot more to talk about right now. So I appreciate everybody's frustration. I think we as a group need to probably make a few choices. I'm sure there's some maybe folks in the public who'd like to speak, but just understand policy decisions do not fall within the purview of the advisory committee.
Evan, thanks. Ness?
Hi, yeah, thanks again. Just to Evan's point, the math that we need to work through on the 1.7 that we heard about on Monday, we have a finance and capital subcommittee meeting that is going to be posted for next Wednesday at 5. I'm going to propose that is with full participation of the school committee. So just wanted to let you guys know that.
Sorry, Ness, I don't know where I went. What day was that at 5?
Next Wednesday at 5.
All right, so just for the record, I expect that the AdCom will have voted on the full budget on Tuesday. The day before that meeting. So I think that's our schedule unless that changes. That's the current scenario. We were supposed to vote it tomorrow, and I think we're going to vote it on Tuesday instead. I don't know if that can change. I mean, if you think that's important, I guess you can check with Julie Straley.
We'll discuss what to do with the 1.7.
Yeah, I mean, the 1.7 is for fiscal 22, and I think what I was hearing from my committee members on Monday, we fully intend to use that, and we were using that meeting to come up with ideas of what we could use it on. So
got it.
I don't think you need to change your process.
Fair enough.
I'd agree with that.
Okay. Before I open it up to the public for some comments or questions, and I will just check one last lap. Anybody other than Evan have something to say? I kid. Anybody else on the school committee? Okay. Priya, I think you're first on my screen. Good evening.
Thanks. Priya Howell, 26 Del Pratt. I just want to echo what M.G.L and others on the school committee have said, which I don't really think I can improve upon. But, you know, parents can always show up at these meetings, but when we can be here, we have been trying to tell everyone that we want to support our schools. And I firmly believe that if you support the budget that the school committee has put forward, and I mean, they really are the experts on what the schools need, that town meeting without hesitation will support it. And, you know, I understand what Evan and Alan are saying, if we truly didn't have the money, but we are sitting on a huge fund balance, and there is been, you know, a lot of appetite to spend that money. For example, I know there are a number of people on AdCom who were supportive of spending it for a pool at the country club. And I would just offer that this is a much better use of that money, because the pool at the country club, we can incur debt to fill that need. But if you just think of the budget as a moral document, it's hard to understand the town's priorities, where we're saying we're going to fund $8 million splash pad, but not a fine arts director or any of these other critical needs for our students. That's all.
Priya, thanks. I mean, just to make sure the record's clear, since I've been doing this for 7 years, the town is not funding an $8 million splash pad in favor of instead of an arts director. I mean, maybe that was flipped, but I just would say that that's not the situation. There is no fund balance going to a pool. There was a slide earlier talking about fund balance usage. So I just want to be clear.
No, I'm sorry. I'm not saying that that is what's happening, but I'm just saying that there were a number of people who were ready to support that. And yet it seems that that probably had more support than these open positions for the schools.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Rebecca?
Hi, Rebecca Nedasitko, 5 Lily Pond Lane. I just wanted to bring up something I believe Ness might have touched on earlier tonight, which is something we heard earlier in the year. The superintendent's office, and the school committee are in need of some back office support. The superintendent was doing manual data entry this year himself, and I don't think that we want the next superintendent to be in that position. I think that if we had some additional, I'm not sure if the position's in there or not, and I do, of course, love the arts, and I would love to see that, but I fear that if we don't have the right analytical support for the superintendent or the school committee, that there could be other missteps that could be avoided if we did have that position.
Thanks, Rebecca. And forgive me, I apologize. Please, if you do speak, give us your name and home address. Joshua Ross, please.
Good evening, Joshua Ross, 125 Wampatuck Road. So I think we've used the analogy a couple of times tonight of we keep digging a hole. The problem with that analogy is when we dig the hole and have the dirt, we're not allowed to put the dirt back in the hole again. It gets shipped off and locked in the vault somewhere that we can never use again. So, you know, and again, I get it, it's the law. You have money left over each year, it has to go into fund balance. But if you look at the way that this town has been budgeted and forecast over the last God knows how many years, fund balance has increased, and this is a sustainable budget presentation, I think 11 out of the last 14 years. And that's on top of pulling out $2.5 million a year on average using it. So I feel like every year we go through this process, and it takes a lot of time, a lot of effort. Everyone here is a volunteer, spends hundreds of hours doing this. And we get to the end of the year and there's money going back into the fund. I think last year we put $5 million back into it. And the meetings and arguments and discussions that were around that budget process in 2000 was crazy. And then $5 million goes back into fund balance, never to be seen again. And so, you know, I don't know. As a taxpayer, I sit here and I see the school committee and the select board and advisory committee. And other than last year, they always seem to argue about this stuff. And it's like two parents in the front of the car arguing over where the kid should go. And you never listen to the kid. We as parents who vote at town meeting tell you what we want to do with this money every year. And so we keep telling you here in these meetings, we will support an override every year for the last 2 or 3 years, like Evan said. And no one is asking us at town meeting. So what else are we going to do? All we have to do is bug you at these meetings to do it, because we can't, as taxpayers, bring it up. It has to be done through the proper channels. So I know there has been a lot of money given back, which probably shouldn't have in the past. But at the end, it is about the kids and what the kids need and equity and all that other stuff people are talking about. So listen, you guys have a job to do, and you're put in these positions, either appointed or elected, and this is what your responsibility is. But I'm telling you asking you as a tax-paying parent of kids in schools, we need to trust what the school committee is asking for and to support the kids. Thank you.
Thanks, Josh. Priya, do you have another comment, or is your hand still up? I'll take that as a no. Anybody else have any thoughts before we circle back to ACES and move forward? All right. Well, like I said, given the timeline and given where we are in this process, I think, for those who joined late, I would just briefly recount, and we can try to get, if anybody wants a copy of this recorded meeting, they're welcome to have it. But at the very beginning of the meeting, maybe before everybody got kids to bed and everything, I know how that goes. I did cover some of the topics that have been talked about later here, in terms of, particularly as it relates to fund balance and the questions related to fund balance and where that's going to go. And I think that, while there is excess fund balance, I'll just make a quick comment that I think, as maybe some people know, if they've paid attention to the fund balance, a portion of that last year grew through a result of both the federal support that we received and supplanted money that otherwise was in the budget, as well as a turn back or a refunding of a fair amount, a 7-figure amount of money that the town advanced for the Aquarian legal fees, which was paid back to the town years after it had been allocated. So there were some. I'm not disputing the fact that fund balance has grown, but I think, as with most things, there's a lot more to it maybe than just meets the eye at the top level. And so I would encourage anybody who wants to at least rewatch the beginning of this presentation when we talk about fund balance usage. Okay, so like I said at the beginning, for those who weren't here also, the intent of tonight's meeting is for the ACES group, which consists of myself, Nancy McDonald, Alan McDonald, Evan Sheehan, and George Danis, to recommend a number to our advisory committee colleagues. That number will be recommended, hopefully voted on tonight if my colleagues are prepared to vote, and will be presented to the advisory committee tomorrow night for a meeting that, as always, is public, and we welcome anyone's attendance. And it may not be voted tonight. The AdCom vote on the overall budget may not happen tomorrow night. It may also happen on Tuesday, depending on our schedule. So with that, I guess I would turn it back to my ACES colleagues and get their thoughts. I will, for the purposes of this discussion, and this is not obviously an exclusive list, but it is a way to at least generally kind of frame the issue, is to think about these options for the budget. And so these will be familiar to people. Option one is to add that's the full request of the school committee, $850,000. Option two is, as Liza mentioned earlier, is consistent with the budget vote that the select board took last night. That 120,240 is a number that looks remarkably similar to the cost of the fine arts director. Option three is an option I put in because there was I am grateful for John and Carrie in Europe for going around and around with me on one of the requests in the school budget with respect to sped vans. And so that's where I came up with that option, but it may also be an option that's covered out of the surplus, which would be great. And then option four would be the no new additions. So just the level services budget that we're maintaining the services that exist today. And obviously, anybody here is welcome to, or on, as anybody on ACES who's thinking about a number to vote could recommend a number that falls in between option 1 and option 4 as well, that isn't on this page. But with this, I guess anybody on ACES who wants to start, to be my guest. Alan, I have a hunch I know where you're going with this.
It's not clear.
I hate to be predictable, but I thought it was being not predictable by taking my position. Anyway, so you for a motion, is that what you're?
No, first I'd like to go around the horn and just let people say their final thoughts, and if
I'm good.
Present a number to me, and then if we're unanimous, we can take a motion. If we're split, we'll sort it out when we get there.
I've said my piece. Thank you.
Option 4, I take it from you.
Correct. Yes, that will be my motion. Yes,
that will be your choice. Okay, Evan, you're next on my screen.
So Dave, I guess if the select board, exhibited some leadership to describe what they'd like to see in the school budget, and they recommended a number that looked somewhat like the fine arts director, I guess I'm probably most likely, would go with that option, knowing that at any particular point in time, even if we went with option 4, and clarified by Sue Nickerson on our meeting last night, if the schools with their 60 plus almost $62 million budget that they have chose to hire a fine arts director, there isn't anything we could do to stop them from doing that. I haven't sat through one of these meetings in the last 5 years where we didn't appropriate or agree to a reserve fund transfer if there was some deficit in the budget. So there are a number of ways to get it done. And I guess, the schools need to do it the way they see fit. I'd be inclined to go with where the select board went, which would be option 2.
Thank you, Evan. Nancy? Did Nancy quit ACES?
Sorry.
Yeah, after this conversation,
Apparently I've lost all my technical skills. I ever the optimist. I believe that there is a bridge to a well-needed override. And I will say, I would like to add, I guess, Dave, if you'll indulge me, that even though I think everyone, at least to my knowledge, everyone unanimously on this call probably tonight believes strongly in an override and is willing to work and fight for it next year. I also know that an override is a difficult thing to do. It is a difficult thing to do, because we're a big town and there's a lot of different constituencies, and we tend to be in our own little worlds and talking to our own constituencies, and everything seems to make sense. And, and then all of a sudden one day you talk to somebody at the fruit center and realize that what's obvious to you may not be obvious to other people. But I think the bigger thing is the mechanics of doing an override are complicated, in that by law, we have to put forward a balanced budget and then put forward our override. And that, for as hard as this year was, and I think you could hear it on every single person that spoke tonight's voice. I think that this year has been hard and exhausting. And I hope that we all come out of it remembering at the end of the day that we're all in this town because we love it and we all love our neighbors. So that being said, it was a long way around the horn to get to, I am an optimist and I believe that we can do that bridge and then all come together and do the hard work to get where we need to be for an override next year. That supports not only the operating budget, which we know we're starting at with an operating override of over $5 million, upwards of $6 million. with no new ads next year, if we were to fund. And one of the things, one of our colleagues on AdCom brought up the other night that was actually came out of, I think it came out of the Sustainable Budget Task Force report, because I had seen it before, which was talking about the overrides done in the state and how many overrides fail, and the size of the average override, which the size of the average operating override is typically in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, not the millions of dollars. And so I think, I don't think that we should go into next year thinking that everyone's going to come in and jump on board. I think that there's hard work to do also, given that on top of that $5 million deficit we're walking into, or between 3.8 and 5.5, whatever we end up with, is going to be a excluded debt override, which is also going to be the largest one, at least in my tenure in Hingham. So, we've got, I think we all know the needs. I think every single person on this call supports those needs and wants, we all want a great town, and we all want, great schools for our kids, and we want safe streets, and we want, garbage that's taken away, and we all want all of those things. And there's a way to get there. I know there is. I'm confident of it, and I think we can do it without putting ourselves at risk this year. So that's.
All right, forgive me if I missed it, but which option did you
Should I go all the way
choose?
around and not answer the question?
Maybe.
All right, I'll be more less obtuse. I'm for no ads, because I do believe we can fund the absolute critical needs.
Got it.
Bridge and get there.
Fair, thanks. That's what I thought. I just didn't want to presume. George.
Thanks, Steve. I thought you might just skip over me, but
no such luck.
You're much too accurate with your record keeping.
Exactly.
I would first of all like to acknowledge the people who have voiced their opinions this evening, whether they be the school committee members or the members from the public, who spoke quite passionately about the need for additional funding. And I hope that everybody who spoke recognizes that AdCom is deeply conflicted, is passionate about this town and about the service levels that are provided to the residents of this town. And I, for one, have spent many a night tossing around in the bed and walking around the house trying to figure out how the heck do we move this thing forward, and what is the solution. I will reserve the right, Dave, to change my vote at a later date. But I come back to the position that I raised in my opening statement, and that is, it's really up to the voters to decide. It's not up to AdCom to use funds to add positions either on the town side or the school side that are not supported by a solid, regular stream of revenue. I don't think it's fair to the voter to go to them and say, we've added all these people, now you got to pay for them. I think the right thing to do, I think the way Prop 2.5 is structured, is that we make the case to the voters. We as a town leaders, town officials, make the case to the voters and say, we simply do not have enough revenue with 2.5, with the decline in the new large buildings going up that that have, you know, inflated our revenue over the last number of years. And we owe it to the voter to go to them and say, this is the budget, this is the level of services that we feel is appropriate, and let the voter decide. And they will either say yes, as many people on this call tonight seem to think they will, or they will say no, or they will say something in the middle, and then we can go forward. So I do think that that there are opportunities, as I said before, in terms of the fees that are added, the fees that could be added, the usage of the fees. And I will say that when fees do not keep pace with expense increases, then the fallback is that the operating revenue or the operating budget has to pick up that difference. And so there's a way to free up operating budget revenue, and that is to utilize more of the fees. You know, I would challenge the idea that we're squirreling away fees for a turf field replacement that's coming a few years down the road when those fees could be used right now. Anyway, you can mark me down under 4 at this point.
Thanks, George. So noted. Okay, I will share my views. I agree. I'm frustrated as well that we're not at a position to get an override. That was what we had all hoped last year. However, having been involved with Ness and John and Dr. Maestas and Wiz and Michelle and Donna on the Sustainable Budget Task Force, as George and I were, we sat in on almost every one of those meetings, if not all of them. The reasons for not pursuing a override this year are set forth in the Sustainable Budget Task Force report, and I find them compelling, and the select board did as well. And so that is why we find ourselves again looking at one-time funds to close this gap. I personally remain very supportive of the additions to the budget last year. I'm supportive of an override to fund them. I was last year, I remain so this year. I'm also supportive of most of the new positions in the proposed for the 2023 budget. What I'm not supportive of is adding new positions this year. And that applies equally to the education and the municipal side of the budget. Town meeting approved last year's additions, but it was not asked to pay for them at that time. Thanks to Hingham's fund balance and federal and state support, we were able to fund the positions with no commensurate tax increase on us at that time. And in fact, we're going to be able to do it yet another year without a commensurate tax increase. I hope and believe that Hingham will approve an override to support the positions that were added last year when they're thoughtfully asked to do so. But I feel strongly the town meeting needs to be asked to pay for the important positions we have already added before adding more positions we cannot pay for on a recurring basis. As for fund balance, the excess fund balance that currently exists is proposed to be used for capital projects throughout the town, including at the high school and for the tennis courts, and to defray some of the tax impact of the expected foster school and public safety debt. In my view, and I feel this super strongly, the most important thing for Hingham is that we pass an override to reset our budget. The consequences of a failed override are grim. Nancy pointed it out. Next year, when the override goes to town meeting, there will be an override budget, and there will be a budget if an override fails. And those both will be produced in advance. That's the law. Now, there's a chance you could go with a tiered override. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but we have a lot of work to do to get the override ducks in a row. Adding new positions this year, and thereby further increasing the cost of a level services budget, in my view, does not help get an override passed next year. While I see the need for the proposed new positions, I would rather add them in the context of an override with express town meeting support than add them now and necessarily increase the cost to the town of maintaining the status quo a year from now. So I too am at option 4, and I remain as optimistic as Nancy that there may be a mechanism with the existing surplus to the extent that it remains one, and the good work of the school committee colleagues to find ways to apply that, if possible. I'm all for it. So I wish them the best in doing so. So at that point, I would accept a motion to approve a recommended school education budget for FY23 in the amount of $61,826,503.
So moved.
Second,
Second,
any further discussion? Okay, we come to vote. I'm just going to go on my screen. Evan,
Aye.
George,
aye.
Al,
Aye.
Nancy,
Aye.
Dave Anderson, I'm an aye as well. Okay, thank you guys. Thank you to our school committee colleagues and to everybody who joined us tonight. I appreciate your engagement. I appreciate your letters. Know that we read them, and we are grateful for your involvement, and we hope it continues, because obviously we need work over the next year to make this a reality. Liza?
Yeah, I just want to get clarification on what you said about, I'm not questioning your vote. So you said that you're not supportive of adding positions, but then you just said, if, maybe I'm interpreting this, that if we found use of our surplus to fund the fine arts director, you'd be okay with that?
Well,
That's not up to us, Liza.
let me speak for myself.
From your position of declaring to town meeting, this is what I'm just want to make sure that we're clear to the town of.
The vote for the ACES budget is the vote of the 61,826,503. That's
Right.
that's what we're going to recommend to AdCom.
Yep.
I think that's the beginning and the end of our recommended budget for you guys in terms of what we control. Do you think it's otherwise?
Another way to say it might be you can spend it on spend on whatever you deem necessary. But if you do it on the arts director, you may not have it to do it for a.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's up to you guys. I agree.
So maybe we take one-time costs from fiscal 23, pay them forward, free up that money. But you're also talking about, you just made a statement about you don't want to add positions that aren't sustainable. So,
because you already have 34 of them.
I know, Evan. I know where you're coming from.
I'm not sure what. I mean, I didn't mean anything by my statement that carries any more weight than the amount that we've just decided to recommend to the advisory committee. I mean, I think Al is right. I mean, you have, if it's approved by the advisory committee and by town meeting, you have $61,826,503 to spend in fiscal 23. I don't know what else to say. I mean, that could be spent on whatever you guys decide to spend it on, right?
Yes, it can. I just hope that, and the goal would not, that's not to exceed it. When you start talking about your wishes of not adding personnel, and then you say, but if you find it, you move things around and substitute the personnel.
I don't think I said any of that.
Okay.
What I was alluding to was you guys have work to do on this surplus, if in fact it is a surplus. And what I'm saying is that, as Evan pointed out earlier tonight, that surplus is a school committee decision. You were allocated whatever you were allocated in 22, and that's under your control as well. So I'm sorry if I was confused you. I mean, we have one job this year, and that's to give a number. And I think we've given, we now have a number we will give to the advisory committee, as we have done in years past.
But Dave, that's no different than every year. And Liza, you guys
doesn't seem that way to me.
No,
Right.
Go make your sausage. Go do what you need to do.
Okay, I hope that's the message, and we don't get into the opining on, when we start opining on personnel, I know it's a sensitive issue because personnel is, you know, ongoing, and there's other factors with health insurance and that type of thing that impacts the budget. But
Well, I don't know. I'm not sure that anybody in AdCom is opining, or ACES is opining on personnel. I'm not sure exactly what you're referring to.
Well, Dave, we did last year because you added 34 positions. So we needed to understand what the buildup was.
Well, we approved a
34.
budget. We approved
Yeah.
a budget, but you know, yes, I'm sorry. Maybe I'm confused. I'm not sure what's confusing about this.
I know it.
I think that-
Yeah.
I think it's not so much confusion. I mean, the school committee, if we get $61,826,000 something dollars, we get to decide how to spend that. Period. Full stop. I think the only concern that what the committee has longer term concerns, because we're saying, well, but are people going to be angry with us if we spend all that money on filling new positions? And then all of a sudden next year, is it going to come back to bite us because you're going to say, whoa, I just spent all that money on personnel. But those are our decisions to make by
Correct.
statute, and we will make them.
Yeah, those are your problem.
Exactly.
Okay,
So
thank you.
yes. Thank you, Liza.
Okay, I would accept a motion. Well, I'll let you go first if you want to go, Michelle.
Thank you. Just really quickly, thank you for your time, all the work that you've put into it. It is much appreciated. This group has always been very supportive of the schools. Sure, a little disappointed that we didn't get the ask for this year, but understand the rationale behind it. And I just want to assure everyone on this call, from AdCom to fellow school committee to Jamie and John and all the parents on here, that despite the fact that we did not get the budget request that we asked for, I have no doubt in my mind that this committee will continue to fund what's necessary to give the students of this town the absolute best education that they deserve and that the taxpayers pay for. So please, everyone, leave this call knowing that we will move heaven and earth to make this work and figure out a way to get to where we need to be for our students, because that's what Jamie and John and Gary and Dr. Adams and all the other people, including our unbelievable teachers and staff, they hear all that, and I hope they know we will do everything we can to move this district forward. So thank you for your time tonight and for your vote. And with that, I will take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
And a second.
I'll second.
Thank you. All in favor? Just aye.
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 Jen and Tim?
Sorry, I said aye.
Aye.
Okay,
Aye.
sorry. Thank you. All right, we're adjourned at 10:21.
Thanks, Michelle. I'll accept the motion to adjourn the ACES Advisory Committee, Education Subcommittee.
So moved.
Thanks, Evan.
Second.
Thanks, George. Al?
Aye.
Evan?
Aye.
Nancy?
Aye.
George?
Aye.
Dave? Aye. We're adjourned. Thanks all.
Thank you.